before we dive into it. Okay. So we're here today because I in particular really wanted this event for myself. And I know a lot of other people who are interested in net zero housing. And we haven't had the discussion. We should not be building any more houses that are not net zero in this day and age. And so how do we build more of these houses? We need more information. And I wanted to build one, but I don't really have enough information. So for people like me, it's good to start talking about this. So now I'm going to introduce Sarah Simon, who is from the MIT Energy, Environment, and Sustainability Network, and they are co-sponsoring this event. So she's going to introduce what they do briefly.
Great. We are the MIT Alumni Energy, Environment, and Sustainability Network. So we try and abbreviate that as EESN, which gives you no clue about who we are or what we do. But we're here to help educate and inform alums about protecting the environment, about clean energy, and about sustainability, which we start talking about these days as circular economy. Certainly energy is one of the major forces that humans put a footprint on the world. And a lot of times now, the three things combined, we end up calling climate. So many of the groups in our network are doing lots of different activities about trying to protect the environment and trying to get climate change to be reduced a little. The point basically for the network is anywhere that alums are educating and informing other alums about what's happening and then connecting them, because there's a lot of synergies and a lot of extra energy that could be found when we get together and we act, hopefully to get things done, because we really have an awful long way to go in the next 8 years in order to try and keep global warming under 1.5 degrees centigrade. So we have a website, which Ramon Bueno, one of our webinar coordinator, will put in the chat later. And we try to keep track of news and different things going on. The website's public. We do have speakers all over the network from outside of MIT, but we are always trying to highlight and help the alums get together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sarah, for your introduction. I see that Beverly posted a link for some tours that are happening in June, if you're interested in that kind of activity. What I'm going to do next is, so we have 3 panelists today, and we are going to go in the order of Dr. Alpha Arsano first. Alpha and I know each other for many years because she was actually a Tata Fellow when I was running the MIT Tata Center. And so I knew her as a grad student, and now she's a professor of architecture at Northeastern University, which is very, very cool. And what, so she's going to speak first, and then we're going to have Beverly Craig speak. And Beverly, I met at a conference at MIT Energy Initiative, which we had in April, called Working the Energy Transition. And Beverly was kind enough to come and speak to this group as well. And then she has Nick Falkoff that she works with, and he actually does the important stuff, which is make this happen, make it a reality. And that's the part that I'm really excited to learn more about. So each speaker has about 10 minutes. And then after the 3 panelists go, we are going to stop the recording and we're going to have questions from the audience. Okay, Alpha, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, is the screen visible?
Yes.
Thank you, wonderful. Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm very excited and happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. As Diana nicely introduced, I come mostly from the research and academia side. Most of my work focuses on looking at climate, carbon equity, and also trying to make sustainable building design accessible for the majority, for the public. And for me, the discussion about net zero really falls at the heart of that. as we really try harder and implement different strategies to make net zero buildings happen, we explore various building design strategies. So I'd like to share perhaps this slide, which I really like always to show to give a background about the urgency of this discussion. This chart is showing different existing floor plan areas in different parts of the world. So the lighter color, the gray, is showing what's predicted to be accommodated by 2030, by 2050, and the darker one, the darker part of the each circle is showing existing floor plan area. What's really fascinating is what we discuss about net zero is not just about here in the US, but looking at globally regions in Africa or other areas in the Middle East or even Asia. You can see the need for new construction is threefold. Sometimes it has to increase 100%, and that demand is not evenly distributed. So the fact that we consider climate when we think about net zero buildings is very, very crucial. This is another slide which shows a comparison of upcoming new constructions in locations such as here in Boston, or in a temperate climate, Addis Ababa in East Africa, or Mumbai in Asia, which is a very hot climate. It would be very hard to differentiate which building belongs to which climate, in contrast to what would have been the case, say 100 or 200 years ago, where buildings mostly really mimic, or they really responded to climatic conditions and other forces which are abundant locally. So this is a proof that climate is really being ignored in most of the discussions, especially in construction and architecture and technology that's happening at the moment. Sarah also mentioned how we are really trying to keep or limit global temperature increase, trying to respond to all these forces that are leading to climate change. And studies now show that if the goal is to really keep temperature increase to below 2 degrees C or 1.5 degrees C in comparison to the pre-industrial time, it's very important that we take actions in buildings, because all building stock would have to become net zero by 2050 if we are to achieve that goal, which was originally set under the Paris Climate Agreement. Of course, buildings really are responsible for a majority of global resource consumption and energy use, which makes the issue even much more important. And of course, we say, of course, we have to have net zero buildings by 2050, but the question is, how can we do it? It's not as simple as the goal really is set. And one approach, one way to think about it is, how do we empower designers, homeowners, people who are really in the construction system? And evolving design attitude becomes very important. Instead of completely jumping into high-tech solutions or transitioning 100% from what we knew about passive and low-tech strategies to a high-tech strategy, knowing how to dial between those two extremes would be very key. Just to illustrate an example, one of the Bostonian vernacular apartments or residential buildings, I live in one of those. Most of them are really low performance. Probably they really have poor performance for their glazing, low insulation, the equipment, the lighting, and all the other systems used in the house are not high performance. They rely on probably a gas heating system. And if we look at some strategies to make that home improved, the first strategy, some homeowners might think about is, okay, let's upgrade and install heat pumps into the design, into the building. And, doing some quick comparisons. Here, I did a simple calculation trying to compare the low performance version we have originally compared to, with some upgrades, how much do we save in terms of energy if we install heat pumps? So here, in this simple assessment, okay, 62% of the heating load could be really improved. But then the question is really, how do we know if, installing heat pumps first is the best strategy versus doing other sorts of upgrades? So there's a possibility to replace glazings. There's a possibility to improve the airtightness of the building. We can add insulation, or we can work with efficient equipment and lighting in the building. So with this assessment, if we first, say for instance, prioritize this kind of home improvements before we get to the building heating and cooling system, we might even get much more further in terms of improving energy use. So we might get down, say, close to 78% in terms of energy savings. So some of the work we do is really making these kinds of assessments accessible for homeowners, anyone who's doing these kinds of studies, students, designers, consultants. That's why we launched an online platform, a web tool called Clima Plus, which is openly accessible for the public. And the idea is using these really powerful tools, such as our phones, or it could be a tablet, and be able to explore various strategies and compare combinations of passive and active strategies before really jumping into the some of the high-tech, fully active solutions. So today, really, I would like to leave this discussion, these 3 points, which I take with myself for thinking and also for everyone else. The first one is when we talk about net zero, I think it's very important for us to think how we can integrate the active and the passive building strategies. Which would mean, we prioritize hybrid way of designing. And second, thinking about a hybrid building design means we also take climate really into consideration. So a bioclimatic design approach is still really, really relevant when we talk about the future building stock, which means, every climate offers at least a little bit of opportunity to think about a passive strategy. Not every climate maybe is conducive to have 100% passively conditioned building, but always thinking about how to take the best opportunity, the best combinations for this hybrid mode of operations would be really relevant. And the third point being making this accessible. I think Diana's motivation even for organizing this panel is to have access to the tools and resources that would enable her as a homeowner, or as a researcher, or anyone who's interested to promote the idea, to compare and taste some of the various strategies and come up with some actionable decisions. Thank you very much.
Okay, Alpha, thank you so much. We're going to hold questions until all the speakers have finished presenting. So Beverly, the floor is yours now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Beverly Craig, and this has been great because we're talking global to start with, and then I work for a state agency here in Massachusetts called the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. And so we're just a small state quasi-governmental agency, only about 50 people or so, but we are funded by a very small fee, usually about 20 cents per residential home per month, that goes into a fund that helps fund our activities. I would say most people who know us in Massachusetts probably know us because of our internship program. For 9 years, we've been funding $16 per hour for students to go work at companies that are working in the energy efficiency and clean energy space. And we just actually hit our 5,000th student funded this spring. So it's really exciting. If any of you do work in Massachusetts and are interested in that program, please reach out at some point, because it's a great opportunity for your company and a great opportunity for students to learn more about these fields. I guess I would say we are an organization that does a lot of work around innovation. We are very small. We are not the same as MassSave, who are huge in the state, and they're the big money in the state. But we do like to try and do a lot of sort of pilot projects and innovation and help with policy work to sort of pave the way for other state actors to sort of scale things up. And just setting the stage for Massachusetts. In Massachusetts last year, the state legislature and the governor did sign on to getting to net zero by 2050, which is exactly what we were just talking about. And what does that mean in the building sector? So, you know, we heard that about 40% of emissions come from buildings. Some of that is electric, right? So if somebody else in the state is working to make that electric grid all renewable, sort of what is left in homes? And that's about 27% of emissions in Massachusetts come from the fossil fuels that are actually in buildings on site. So if you ever look at the pie chart of sort of where emissions are in the state, the biggest slice is still transportation, but the next biggest is buildings. And what it means to get to net zero by 2050, you saw in the pie charts that Dr. Arsano was showing that in the US, we have a lot of existing building stock, and we will be seeing some new. So we expect by 2050 around 500,000 new buildings in Massachusetts. And we definitely do need those to be as ultra efficient as possible with as little fossil fuels possible. But probably the bigger challenge is that we know about 80% of the buildings that exist today, about 2 million buildings, need to be made much more efficient. Those envelopes, those windows, that insulation, that airtightness, and we need to get the fossil fuels out of them. That's where we have to take the gas systems and make them into heat pump systems. And so I'm just going to talk about 2 initiatives that Mass EC has worked on. We definitely are not the only players here, but the first is sort of around new construction. And in new construction, you hear a lot about passive house design. The Germans have been fantastic in coming up with these standards around passive house design, and they can be applied to single family homes, to multifamily, we have an office building in downtown Boston that's going to be passive house, the office building. And what does it mean? It's really super efficient new construction. And we're talking like 40 to 60% less energy per square foot. There's a lot of other great benefits associated with it too. So first of all, I will say, I learned English first, and the German does not sound great to most Americans. So passive house, you know, first of all, house means building in Germany. So when they came up with the standard, they're talking about buildings in general, not just single family homes. You definitely can do passive house on single family homes, but it actually gets a lot less expensive the bigger you get. You have less square footage, right? And less outside cold or heat that could be coming in or out. And then here in Massachusetts, going back maybe 5-6 years ago, there was just a lot of skepticism from people in the state saying building is so expensive in Massachusetts already. Adding passive house onto that, like, it just sounds super expensive. And so we'd actually heard very differently from our friends who work in the affordable housing fields in Pennsylvania. They've been for a couple years sort of giving better scoring for low-income housing tax credits if people came in with a passive house design for multifamily rentals. And so we'd been hearing it wasn't really that expensive. We also heard that from our neighbors in New York, a lot of, especially New York City projects. And so we had no luck like convincing our state agency that works on affordable housing to do something similar to what Pennsylvania did, because they were worried it would be way too expensive. So we said, well, what can we as an agency do? Why don't we give some people some extra money and get some people doing this work? Let's track the costs as closely as we can. And let's just see, with experience and with some of this, we can see where the high numbers are and where the low numbers are. And maybe the fears that people had of it being a 15% incremental cost or 10% will be really off base. And so my agency funded 8 affordable housing projects to go to the passive house standard. And all of them did get funded, yay! You never know really when you do that. So we funded $4,000 per unit for people to do that upgrade. And 5 of those are now built, 3 are under construction. And we have been tracking the costs as closely as we can. It's not it's definitely an art, but because what would people have done without the extra money is always not exactly clear, but we still have tracked it, and the costs have been relatively modest. Everything from 1.4% to 4.3%. And honestly, the one with the highest, the 4.3%, that if you look at the roof line, it's super complicated. That's probably why. So in all cases, we found that higher levels of ventilation was one of the 2 highest costs in all of our projects. And I've got to say, after COVID, I think it's not that hard to sell people on better ventilation in multifamily buildings. So cost is one piece of it, but performance is another. Are these buildings really performing 40 to 60% better than what people would build otherwise? And we're fortunate in that a number of cities and now require energy disclosure ordinance for larger buildings. And so you could actually pull this data yourself from Boston's website if you want, for larger buildings that were built between 2010 and now. The one in green on the left, the far left, is the building that's the picture of. It's the distillery. It was the first multifamily passive house building in Massachusetts that was built. And if you look at the purple buildings and the blue buildings, the purple are LEED certified buildings and the blue are code ones. So overall, the median is 63% less energy for this passive house building. So, we were expecting between 40 and 60%. We're seeing on the better end of that range. And this is consistent with data in Philadelphia, in New York. There's a couple of projects in New Hampshire. We have similar data. But the main point is for a pretty low incremental cost, we're seeing very, very large savings in terms of how much energy per square foot these buildings are doing. And if net zero is our goal, we got to go here with this kind of building. So 9 months after Mass CEC did our 8 projects that we were doing, Mass Save came up with a sort of similar project. So instead of $4,000, they're giving $3,000. And it's not just for affordable housing, it's for any multifamily building in the state. The response has been huge. There's over 116 buildings that have either done some work on feasibility study for what it would take to get to passive house, or actually done the modeling. We'll see how many of those actually do certify, but it's really a game changer for what's been proposed in the next couple of years for multifamily buildings. So the second other, so that's new construction, right? But we have a much bigger, harder problem with our existing buildings. And so all of you, having gone to MIT, know that Boston and Massachusetts have a predominance of this building type called a triple decker. So it's 3 identical units stacked on top of each other. And this is, usually 100-year-old housing. It was often built by immigrant families who would live on one floor and rent to cousins on another floor, and then rent one floor out. And a lot of times they've even stayed in the family over generations and have a lot of deferred maintenance. They also are terrible performers. So in terms of energy, if any of you've lived in them, we love them, they're awesome, but they're often very uncomfortable because they don't have much insulation at all. And air tightness, which is so important to when we're talking about passive house, is really, really bad. They're drafty. So what Mass CEC, since we have about 12,000 of these in the state of Massachusetts, if we're going to decarbonize, Mass CEC thought, well, what can we do? Let's have a competition, a design competition. We'll give people a couple sample triple deckers and see what ideas people can have, and we'll give some prizes. And so we did that, and actually on our website, you can see all the 13 different proposals that were there. There's some really great, incredibly interesting ideas. Each one of them has a poster. You can see sort of where it started, how much energy was decreased, and sort of summary of what they were proposing and costs. One of the things we learned is it's pretty expensive to take an old house and retrofit it. The costs per unit were at the low end 50,000. At the high end, we were talking about very large numbers. And so what we wanted to do is actually, and what we are doing right now, is to test, to provide some funding for some affordable housing owners who have triple deckers to actually do this work, so we can put better numbers on them. I guess what I would say is, in general, the proposals we got for the design competition, lots of very interesting things, but probably Tesla proposals when we need a Chevy Bolt, right? We need to figure out how to do this less expensively so we can scale. And so lots of really interesting information. Solar on all of these was really good payback. The challenge is if you, who's going to get the electricity in 3 units, right? So we are hoping to test out a couple different possibilities with the pilot money that we have. And we think, especially when there's an owner occupant on one of the floors, powering one of the floors with the solar, and then some common area things like laundry and other things with that solar might make sense. And then we also did have a bunch of proposals that suggested adding at least 1 unit to one of these buildings as part of a deeper energy retrofit, sometimes putting panels on the outside of the entire building. And so why do we sort of encourage those? It's that it really changes the economics pretty dramatically if you can add additional units, right? The extra value that you can create might be able to help cross-subsidize that retrofit world. And we also do know that in a couple communities in Massachusetts, it should not be that hard to do this extra unit adding on. So for example, in Cambridge and in Somerville, there are affordable housing overlay districts that would allow this density as of right. So you wouldn't have to go through a normal special permit process. It would be much easier than you would think in a lot of other communities, as long as that extra unit is affordable housing. And so I'm going to sign off here and give it to Nick, because what everybody wants to hear is how you actually do this on your house. But I encourage all of you to take advantage of Mass DEC's programs. And we do have some really great, if you're ever advertising a position that's related to energy efficiency or renewable energy, we have a free jobs board. So please take advantage of our resources. And Nick, I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, thanks, Bev. Let me just get this slideshow going. Slideshow, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Sorry, share screen. MIT. Can you see it now?
Almost. Yes, now we can.
Okay, so my name is Nick Falkoff. I'm the owner of Auburndale Builders and also the founder of the Studio HPDC, which is a nonprofit entity that we use for community outreach. This is a picture of our office. And we do a lot of sort of experimenting and trying out all these new building types and building these. So I'm going to cover a wide range of topics, and I'll probably get a little off topic, but that's okay. So one thing I just wanted to talk about was I feel very fortunate to be working in construction during a time when a lot of women pioneers or innovators are sort of leading the way. And so Katrin Klingenberg brought Passive House to the US from Germany. She really single-handedly sort of like introduced it and then started FIES and sort of drove this Passive House sort of revolution we're seeing going across the country. And so I like to give credit to Katrin because she's very inspirational and she's very very knowledgeable, and she has put together a ton of tools. So if you check out fies.org, you will get a lot more information. You'll see lots of projects, a lot of resources, and it's a great place to go for entry-level developers, all sorts of levels for information. Another group that I will give a lot of credit to that I've learned a lot from is through NESE. So NESE is the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association. Miriam Aylward is the executive director, and Florence McGregor is the program director. I do a lot of NESE events. I go on a lot of NESE pro tours to learn about buildings. How do they work? We've hosted a lot of pro tours. And through NESE, I've really built up a great network of people that I can go to and ask technical questions. I can ask consulting questions. I can really reach out and get any question answered through experienced people. So if you're interested in NESE, they have started a peer review business group. So if you're a business owner and you're interested in running a triple bottom line business, this is been one of the best things I've done as a company owner is to join a peer review group. They are hosting an open house sort of tomorrow. If you click on this link here, and basically what it is it's all companies that are interested in sustainable energy, but there's architects, there's builders, there's tradespeople, there's suppliers. And we do peer reviews where we evaluate each other's companies and we give feedback and how to be more sustainable from a people perspective, from a planet and prosperity. And so it's a great group. And that's Kate Stevenson on the right. She's lead of Helm Construction Solutions, leading a peer review. Kate does a lot of work with the studio, and she does a lot of work with our company in helping to guide us through some of these advanced assemblies. And I also want to give credit. So we do a lot of building, and the guys get all the credit in the field. But our administrative team at Auburndale Builders of Carrie Ann Buckley, Victoria, and Catherine Nunez, they craft the paperwork with the same attention to detail as our finished carpenters, and their attention to detail allows me to do stuff like this. So I'm not tied up doing the finances or the billing or tracking all the receipts, and they do an unbelievable job, which allows me to do what I like to do. And then in the field, our company, we have great project managers and we have great electricians. So I say these guys are the ones leading the charge every day, every weekday. That's Ryan McCarthy on the left with Mike Elwell, and that's Brian Healy and Jim Buckley. And these are the guys who are really doing the hands-on stuff, learning the details, learning the new technical stuff, and then putting it into practice. And they make it happen so that I don't have to, so I can do these sorts of things, do presentations and community outreach. So a little bit about the company. My company started, we did a lot of remodeling. This is a project we did with Helios Design, which is like an old Victorian with a modern addition. And we did remodeling for about a decade before we built our first new home. And our first new home was, I'll come back to it, was the Whalen Passive House. But then we started working with Stephanie Horowitz at ZD. And Stephanie's firm has really found a way to do like really nice modern designs with high performance. And our team sort of integrated, and we worked together on a number of projects. We're going to be building our third house with them starting this spring. When we're building these homes, we really, the builder and the architect, we have to work very closely together to make sure we understand what are the technical details, what is the cost, and what are the designs how are they going to translate to the field, and what does that mean for the carpenters in the field. So that's Zen Saito on the right. Zen is one of our most experienced project managers. He does lots of mock-ups. You're looking here at a net zero house we built in Newton that is actually net, that's the finished house. It's actually net zero with transportation. So this house that Stephanie and Matt designed actually generates enough electricity to not only power the house, but also power their electric cars. So when we say net zero, we can also say net positive or net positive with transportation. So this is a very nice house we did in Newton a few years ago. Something else I've become recently really interested in is not only just the energy that goes into the buildings and the passive house stuff, but I've become very interested in Doug Talamy's work on biodiversity. And so I kind of want to expand what we talk about when we talk about energy in buildings, in that we build these buildings, we focus on the energy, we know how to deliver that, but a lot of times it's also at the expense of the landscape. And so looking at ecological pyramids, I've been looking at Talamy's podcast and his books. He talks about how the energy transfer, when we don't put native plants on our sites or in our jobs and our projects, we're sort of damaging the food chain. So I'd like to talk about it, that we can't really build a home for biodiversity without a foundation, and the herbivores are the foundation. I feel that so much of what we talk about in building is the building itself, when the landscape is a big part of that. So this is a drone footage of the Whalen Passive House being built. And during landscape, we really just build roads around these houses. So this is a super energy efficient certified passive house, but we sort of destroy the site when we go in. But this homeowner that we built for, not only do they want an energy efficient home, they also wanted their house to be have a lot of biodiversity. And I was not interested in this at this point, but they were ahead of me in this. And so something I like to talk about with these presentations is like, we forget that we're not the only earthlings. Like when we destroy these habitats to build these homes, we're really damaging the ecosystems. And when we talk about these buildings, if we can expand that and talk about the energy transfer through the food networks outside of the buildings, I think it's good for everyone who lives in that building. It's good for the kids, it's good for the occupants, and it's also just a healthier way for us to build. So we're hosting a biodiversity course right now on the studio website. And I just want to challenge some designers and myself to start thinking about designing the details for biodiversity to thrive with the same attention to detail that we bring to the architecture. And I don't know if maybe we'll do a series on that, but we're currently running one just on biodiversity. This is the Whalen Passive House after construction. There's some conservation land around the house, but the clients really wanted a managed meadow. They got rid of a lot of lawn space that was around the house, and it's just a whole other way to approach it. I was not interested in biodiversity when they did this, but looking back, I called them today and asked them for a few photos. So those clients allowed me to learn Passive House, and I'm grateful for that. And they also like enabled me to start the studio and to use their yard as a research station. So Doug Talmy talks a lot about using our yards as research stations, and I've sort of thought of the studio as a research station for Passive House and new technologies. And so applying that to the house and the landscape is really what we're trying to implement now. This is the studio under construction. That's Craig Buckley, one of our project managers, presenting on a Passive House retrofit of the building that I'm sitting in now, which is our office and the studio. And so that was a few years ago. That's doing a presentation. And then this is last week, we're hosting a certified Passive House designer course at the studio. It's our first event during the pandemic. I'm not going to go into the technical details about how the building is built. All that stuff is available. I just wanted to talk about what we're trying to do with the studio and how it functions as a laboratory of sorts. Dan Rubin, as the chairman of the board of Green Newton, he's somebody else who I've been doing a lot of advocacy work with to get the city of Newton to advocate for passive buildings. So when developers wanted to build a bunch of new developments in the city, they needed Green Newton for community support to get these big developments through. And Dan met with the developers and was able to talk them into advocating for the 4 Passive House principles. And he was surprisingly effective. These are the 4 principles they advocate for. And I'm happy to talk about offline about how he did that locally. But basically, they advocate for minimizing building operation energy, minimized embodied carbon in the buildings that are being built. Buildings had to be all electric and off the natural gas grid, and then minimizing the carbon footprint for transportation to and from the buildings. And because of his advocacy work in Green Newton, there'll be over 1,000 units in the city in the next 10 years built between, or maybe it's 800 units that are going to now be Passive House because he sort of advocated with the developers that it made sense economically. This is a slide of myself and Dan Rubin and Sun Wu from Green Newton at a fair. And I just wanted to put in here that I'll promise to shut up if we can add a 5th principle, that they should try to maximize the opportunities for biodiversity to thrive on the sites. So we can build these great buildings, but if we destroy the biodiversity around them, then that's not that's not sustainable either. Doug Talmy is actually doing a talk on May 26th. You can catch this link that Green Newton is organizing. If you haven't read his books or haven't heard of him, I find him to be very inspirational. One other project that we're also working on is, as the codes are becoming, moving towards Passive House, right now, if you want to learn this stuff, it's a very high bar to enter. It's not that accessible. So when Alpha's talking about making these tools accessible, we need to make the tools not only accessible to the designers and the architects and the policymakers, we need the people in the field to have access to hands-on training. So some people don't learn sitting still, which is like why they end up in construction. So we have an old barn in Upper Falls, and we're going to convert it into a space where we're going to host building mini pods. So we'll have a hands-on course, which we're partnering with Built Energy Plus, and this will be reimbursed through the workforce development funding. But one thing I'm trying to advocate for is when we go for net zero codes and we ask people to build differently, we also need to give them the support. There's a lot of people that don't have the skill set my team has, and they don't have the resources, and we're asking them to build in a new way, and we need to support them when we do that. And if we don't do that, we're going to see a lot of pushback from people saying it's already cost too much. We already have supply chain issues. We already have labor shortages, and now you want us to build more difficult buildings. So I'm all for the higher codes, higher energy codes, but I'm also for we need more support. It shouldn't be just one hands-on course that's available in the whole state. We need lots of hands-on courses. So that's the course we're going to be running. It's called High Performance Building for Carpenters. It'll be 6 4-hour workshops, and we're going to be teaching carpenters how to do this stuff. How do you implement it? How do you troubleshoot? What's the approach? So I'm pretty excited about that, but I'm hoping that we can make this open source like Alpha's product and give this to other people so they don't have to reinvent the wheel in other states. So that's all. Thank you.
Nick, thank you again. Thank you so much, Nick, Beverly, and Alpha. So now I'm going to stop the recording and we're going to open it up to questions.